Luffy had a pretty sweet childhood, surrounded by those he cared about. But what if all of that was stripped away and he ended up in the hands of the main antagonists, the Gorosei? How would the world of One Piece change? And could our protagonist keep his psyche intact? Luffy was always fond of Shanks' stories, but even the man couldn't have imagined that Luffy would end up eating the Gomu Gomu no Mi because he was hungry. Things changed drastically as Shanks put his faith in Luffy, losing an arm in the process, feeling that it was a worthy sacrifice for the future. But Shanks wasn't going to be there to protect Luffy forever. The news of Luffy eating the fruit traveled fast, reaching the ears of CP0, the world government's most elite spies. They wasted no time reporting it to the Five Elders, who stood at the top of the world government. To them, the devil fruit was no ordinary fruit. It was tied to ancient secrets, and its powers were a threat to everything they controlled. While Garp was away, Elder Saturn J. Garcia arrived on Dawn Island with the aim of kidnapping the boy. Luffy, unaware of the danger, was taken by force. He tried to fight back, but there wasn't much a 7-year-old could do. With no one there to protect him, he was whisked away to the Holy Land of Mary Jawaz. There, behind cold walls and under the watchful eyes of the Elders, Luffy was locked up. The Elders gathered to decide what to do with the boy. Killing him seemed to be the easiest way to handle the threat. But Saturn had another idea. Killing Luffy would only return the fruit to the cycle, where someone else could possibly find it. Instead, he proposed something far more sinister, erasing Luffy's memory. The other Elders paused, intrigued. If they wiped Luffy's memories and replaced them with a new story, they could turn him into an ally. They could raise him as their own and turn him into a child who believed the Elders were his family and the world government was his purpose. If this worked, they wouldn't just control Luffy. They would control Nika. Luffy was dragged, kicking and screaming before Imu, the mysterious ruler who stood above even the Elders. Young and helpless, Luffy stood no chance. With a wave of Imu's hand, his memories were wiped clean. His dreams of becoming Pirate King, his love for his family and friends, even the image of his hero Shanks were all gone in an instant. In their place, new memories took root. Luffy believed he had been raised in the shadow of the Elders, trained to obey them, and taught that their rule was absolute. His bright, carefree nature was replaced with discipline and a cold sense of duty. The boy who once dreamed of freedom was now a tool. From the moment his memories were erased, Luffy's life became a strict regimen of training and indoctrination. The Five Elders molded him into the perfect weapon. They didn't just teach him to fight, they taught him to think, strategize, and obey without question. Saturn took overall responsibility for Luffy's development. He ensured that Luffy's loyalty to the world government and the Celestial Dragons was absolute. Saturn also introduced him to Haki, focusing on observation Haki. He forced Luffy to fight blindfolded against CP0 agents, honing his senses until he could predict movements without sight. Though it was grueling, Luffy eventually mastered this ability, able to read even the subtlest shifts in his opponents. Marcus Mars taught him strategy and the art of war. Mars often set up complex simulations using maps and puzzles to test Luffy's ability to plan and adapt. He also drilled the importance of patience and control, forcing Luffy to think before acting. Over time, Luffy learned to temper his natural impulsiveness, becoming a more calculated and effective operative. Topman Warcurry managed Luffy's physical training. Warcurry drove Luffy's body to its utmost extremes. Each day presented fresh challenges, ranging from battling CP0 elites to facing tough survival trials in severe conditions. Warcurry concentrated on armament Haki as well, teaching Luffy how to strengthen his body to extraordinary degrees. Their training bouts were intense, as Warcurry employed his advanced Haki to challenge Luffy's increasing power. Throughout the years, Luffy's armament Haki grew almost indestructible, allowing his blows to crush steel and making his defenses resistant to most assaults. Nosturo excelled in the art of nuance and influence. He taught Luffy to adapt to any surroundings, collect information, and take advantage of vulnerabilities. With Nosturo's mentorship, Luffy developed into a proficient infiltrator, capable of adopting various personas and concealing his real identity as needed. Nosturo also exposed Luffy to the strength of Conqueror's Haki. Although controlling this ability was challenging, Nosturo trained Luffy to utilize it expertly, allowing him to overpower his foes while avoiding undue notice. Shepherd Jupiter taught Luffy about history, or at least the version the Elders wished for him to learn. Jupiter recounted stories to Luffy about the kindness of the Celestial Dragons, depicting pirates and revolutionaries as the antagonists who jeopardized tranquility. Jupiter also urged Luffy to push the boundaries of the Gomu Gomu no Mi. Jupiter regarded the fruit as an instrument of the world government and ensured that Luffy utilized it to its maximum capability. By the age of 17, Luffy had transformed into an entirely different individual. He had grown immensely powerful, with a keen intellect and Haki that could rival the mightiest. The Five Elders had shaped him into the ideal instrument. The Elders started assigning him missions globally, challenges meant to evaluate his loyalty and skills. He infiltrated pirate groups, dismantled rebel factions, and collected information on perilous foes. Like a ghost, he created disorder behind him. To the universe, he became a legend, an unstoppable power that functioned on behalf of the world government. To the Elders, he was their finest achievement. Yet hidden deep inside, beneath the layers of control and conditioning, the essence of the boy who once envisioned freedom remained. Luffy's disappearance broke Garp's normally lighthearted attitude. He searched the oceans, leveraging his status as a marine hero to pursue every clue, but his efforts were constantly hindered by insufficient evidence or interference from the world government. As time passed, he grew increasingly strict and inflexible, dedicating himself fully to his responsibilities as a marine. Although Garp remained loyal to the Navy, his suspicion of the world government increased. He sensed that they were involved in Luffy's disappearance, but he was unable to take action without proof. This frustration made him more resolute, transforming him into a more distant person. His connection with Ace deteriorated, leading Garp to immerse himself in training new recruits to channel his anger and sorrow. Dragon was the first to openly suspect the world government's involvement in Luffy's disappearance. His mistrust of the elders and their regime turned into quiet fury as he connected the dots. Though he couldn't act openly, Dragon began mobilizing the Revolutionary Army on an unprecedented scale. Dragon's efforts to uncover the truth about Luffy became part of his broader mission to dismantle the world government. The incident strengthened his resolve, and his name became synonymous with rebellion. While Dragon rarely spoke of Luffy, those close to him noticed his silent grief. He knew that one day he would cross paths with his son again, but he feared what the world government had done to him in the meantime. Just as before, Sabo lost his memory after his traumatic encounter with the Celestial Dragon. With no recollection of his brothers, Sabo was taken in by the Revolutionary Army. Under Dragon's guidance, he rose through the ranks, his skills and determination making him a formidable fighter. Ace was heartbroken at Luffy's disappearance, but continued to pursue his dreams. Much like the original timeline, he joined up with the Whitebeard pirates and became renowned throughout the world. Shanks was one of the few who pieced together the truth about Luffy's disappearance. His encounters with the world government and its agents confirmed his suspicions. They had taken Luffy, and whatever they were planning involved the Gomu Gomu no Mi. Fueled by anger and a sense of responsibility, Shanks began amassing power. He expanded his influence and became one of the 4 emperors of the sea. Shanks became a force to be reckoned with, his every move carefully calculated to challenge the world government without provoking open war. Though he never spoke of Luffy to his crew, his actions were guided by the hope of one day rescuing the boy who had inherited his hat. As time passed, Ace was captured by the Marines due to Blackbeard's betrayal. Much like the original timeline, the Marines began amassing their forces at Marineford, while Whitebeard headed out to commence his assault. The Marineford War began similarly, with Whitebeard and his crew launching an all-out attack to rescue Ace from his impending execution. The Marines stood united, ready to defend the execution platform and eliminate the threat of the Whitebeard pirates. However, this time, there was an additional element. Luffy. The 5 elders had sent him undercover with the mission to ensure Ace's execution. No one outside the highest ranks of the world government knew of Luffy's presence, and his reputation as their weapon remained a well-guarded secret. As the war raged, Garp sat on the execution platform, a storm of emotions brewing within him. When Ace was finally brought to the platform and the executioners raised their weapons, something inside Garp broke. He leaped into action, knocking the executioners aside and declaring that he would not let his grandson die. The Marines, stunned by the hero's betrayal, hesitated. It was at that moment that Luffy revealed himself. Emerging from the shadows, Luffy confronted Garp, his face cold and devoid of recognition. To Garp, however, the sight of his grandson standing in front of him as an unfeeling weapon was a devastating blow. Luffy and Garp clashed in a ferocious battle, the air crackling with the power of their haki. Garp immediately recognized Luffy's strength, noticing how much he had grown in the years since his disappearance. But what struck Garp even more was the lack of recognition in Luffy's eyes. As they fought, Garp called out to him, pleading for him to remember who he was. Luffy, however, felt nothing but a strange, unfamiliar ache in his chest. Despite the cold efficiency the elders had instilled in him, something about Garp's words made him hesitate. Still, he pressed on, determined to fulfill his mission. Garp was torn and struggled to fight back with full force, and the hesitation gave Luffy the upper hand. But the internal conflict within him grew stronger with every passing moment. Deciding that fighting Garp wasn't worth the delay, Luffy quickly disengaged and made his way toward the execution platform. Ace, watching the events unfold, was stunned to see Luffy standing before him. He yelled out to Luffy, his happiness overtaking him. But Luffy didn't respond as a brother. He approached the platform, ready to deliver the final blow. Ace tried to reach out to him, insisting that they were brothers, but Luffy dismissed his words as desperate attempts to manipulate him. Ace, realizing the depth of the world government's hold on Luffy, smiled sadly. He told Luffy that if he was meant to die, then it would rather be at the hands of the brother he had failed to protect. As Luffy raised his haki-infused fist to strike, his body suddenly froze. Intense, searing pain erupted in his head. He stumbled, clutching his temples as fragmented memories began to surface. He had flashes of his childhood with Ace and Sabo, moments of laughter and tears, and the promise to always be there for each other. Luffy collapsed to his knees in front of the execution platform, gasping for breath as the internal battle raged within him. The memories implanted by Imu and the elders clashed violently with the fragments of his real past. Ace watched in shock as Luffy writhed on the ground and began tugging at his chains to help him. The battlefield came to a standstill as everyone watched the strange scene unfold. Garp, Whitebeard, the Marines, and even the elders' spies hidden among the crowd. As Luffy writhed on the ground, Garp saw his grandson's pain and moved to help him. But Sengoku, seeing the potential threat to the world government's plans, stepped in. He tried to pin Garp down, but the old man wouldn't wouldn't let anyone get between him and his grandson. He clashed with Sengoku, betraying the Marines in turn and choosing his family over everything else. In the chaos, Sakazuki stepped onto the execution platform. He had no patience for sentimentality or delays. With cold resolve, he seized the opportunity to end Ace's life while everyone was distracted. Before anyone could stop him, Sakazuki plunged his fist through Ace's chest. Time seemed to freeze as Ace's blood sprayed across the platform. His eyes widened in shock before a weak smile crossed his face. He whispered his final words, looking toward Luffy, telling him to live free. Ace collapsed, his chains rattling as his body slumped lifelessly to the ground. The battlefield fell silent, the weight of the moment suffocating everyone present. A loud roar was heard far from the execution platform as Whitebeard saw his son collapse. Luffy, still on his knees, stared at Ace's lifeless body. The memories of their shared childhood flashed vividly in his mind, breaking through the mental barriers implanted by the elders. Emotions began overwhelming him, and for the first time in years, Luffy let himself feel. The pressure of his emotions erupted outward, releasing a devastating wave of conqueror's haki. The battlefield shook as weaker Marines and pirates alike collapsed, unconscious from the sheer force of Luffy's will. Even the strongest among them, including Sengoku and the admirals, felt the crushing weight of his fury. Luffy's body began to transform. Dark, black, and red clouds began swirling around him like a storm, and his eyes glowed with an intense, burning anger. His devil fruit was awakening. This was not the joyful liberation of Nika. It was a corrupted, repressed state, driven by pain and rage. The ground beneath him warped and twisted, his newfound power altering reality in chaotic, unsettling ways. Without a word, Luffy lunged at Sakazuki, his movements erratic, yet overwhelmingly powerful. His rubbery body stretched and contorted in ways that defied logic, each attack infused with his rage-fueled haki. The air crackled with energy as his punches landed, shaking the very foundation of Marineford. Sakazuki struggled to keep up. His magma attacks, once unstoppable, were met with equal ferocity as Luffy's rubbery fists absorbed and countered them with devastating force. Luffy roared, his voice echoing unnaturally, saying that everyone would pay. The ground beneath him melted and cracked from the heat of their battle, and even the surrounding ocean began to churn violently. As Luffy's rampage continued, Garp finally broke free from Sengoku's hold and called out to his grandson. For a brief moment, Luffy hesitated. The Marines regrouped, determined to subdue him as Sakazuki leapt back. Luffy, consumed by fury and the unstable power of his corrupted Gear 5 form, overwhelmed the Marines attempting to restrain him. Spotting Sakazuki, Luffy dashed toward the Admiral as he grabbed a Marine saber on his way. With a single swing, the blade cleaved through Sakazuki's magma-coated arm, severing it completely. The Admiral screamed in agony, blood spraying. Sakazuki staggered back, attempting to counterattack, but the tremors of Whitebeard's quakes disrupted his footing. Massive cracks formed in the earth, and buildings collapsed into the sea. The battlefield was now a hellscape of destruction, and both pirates and Marines scrambled to survive. Amid the devastation, something even more ominous began to manifest. Dark magic circles appeared on the ground. From the center of the largest circle emerged Saint Saturn. Saturn's presence radiated authority and power, sending a wave of fear through the battlefield. The Gorosei's gaze locked onto Luffy, his voice calm but firm, cutting through the chaos like a knife. He told Luffy to stand down and return with him. Luffy, breathing heavily and visibly strained, turned to face Saturn. His Gear 5 form had begun to take its toll, his body trembled from the backlash, and his once unrelenting will faltered. Saturn took a step forward as Luffy's knees buckled, and the dark clouds around him began to dissipate. Just as Saturn moved to retrieve him, a figure appeared between them with a flash of red and gold. Shanks! The Yonko stood protectively in front of Luffy. His blade, Gryphon, was already unsheathed. His eyes, sharp and focused, met Saturn's without fear before declaring that Luffy wasn't going anywhere with him. Saturn's expression hardened, threatening Shanks over what would happen if he didn't step aside. Shanks' grip on Gryphon tightened, and he told Saturn to step aside or face his wrath. Recognizing Shanks as a serious threat, Saturn's calm demeanor shifted. His body began to contort as he unleashed the power of his devil fruit. His mythical Zoan form, resembling a Gyuki, was a terrifying sight, but the Elder was facing an Emperor of the Sea. The ground beneath him cracked, facing an Emperor of the Sea. Power radiated outward. Marines and pirates alike scrambled to avoid the sheer pressure of his presence. Shanks didn't hesitate. With a single step, he closed the distance between them, his blade glowing with a fierce red aura. He swung Gryphon with precision, aiming for Saturn's long legs. Saturn met the attack with his massive claw, the impact creating a shockwave that rippled across the battlefield. The clash between Shanks and Saturn was monumental, colliding and creating an electrified storm in the air. The sheer force of their fight caused the ground to quake, adding to the already crumbling state of Marineford. As the two titans battled, Luffy's body gave out. The strain of his suppressed memories, the emotional toll of Ace's death, and the backlash from his unstable Gear 5 form were too much to bear. He collapsed to the ground, unconscious, his body reverting to its base state. Despite Saturn's monstrous Zoan form, Shanks' overwhelming mastery of Conqueror's haki began to push the Elder back. The Yonko's sheer determination to protect Luffy radiated retaliated like an unyielding storm, but his victory was far from assured. Just as Saturn stumbled back, more dark magic circles formed on the fractured ground, their ominous glow signaling reinforcements. One by one, the rest of the 5 elders emerged. Their focus was singular: retrieve Luffy at all costs. Seeing the elders' relentless pursuit, Whitebeard decided it was time to act. Though gravely wounded from his earlier clashes with the Marines, the world's strongest man raised his Basento and slammed it into the ground with a roar. The entire island quaked violently, the force of his Gura Gura no Mi shaking Marineford to its core. Whitebeard's voice carried across the battlefield as he told Shanks to get Luffy out of there while he handled these cowards. The earth split apart, giant fissures swallowing Marines and pirates alike. The seas around Marineford surged as tsunamis formed, threatening to engulf the battlefield entirely. Whitebeard's quakes created chaos so profound that even the elders were momentarily forced to defend themselves. Shanks gritted his teeth, realizing the gravity of Whitebeard's words. The elders were far too determined to let Luffy go, and if they succeeded in reclaiming him, all hope of freeing him from their influence would be lost. With the battlefield collapsing into chaos, the Yonko made his decision. Turning to Garp, who was fighting Sengoku, he told him they had to move quickly. The rest of Shanks' crew was dealing with the Marines and Admirals efficiently, as Shanks grabbed Luffy's unconscious body, draping him carefully over his back. Garp hit Sengoku with a galaxy impact, making him reel back and creating an opening. The Vice Admiral's face was heavy with grief and anger, but he knew saving Luffy was more important than continuing the fight. Shanks called for his crew to retreat as the Whitebeard pirates withdrew, with only their captain remaining behind. As Whitebeard unleashed another devastating quake, the entire island began to crumble into the ocean. Pirates scrambled to escape, while the Marines fought to maintain order amidst the destruction. The elders, however, were undeterred. Saturn snarled as he lunged toward Shanks, only to be intercepted by Whitebeard's massive Basento. The two clashed with such force that the ground beneath them shattered further. Whitebeard roared as his hockey-infused strikes forced Saturn back. The other elders moved to assist, but Whitebeard's crew, led by Marco, intercepted them, buying Shanks and Garp the precious time they needed to retreat to the Red Force. Navigating the collapsing terrain, Shanks and Garp made their way to the coast, where the Red Hair pirates awaited, the ship ready to set sail. The two leaped aboard just as the ground beneath them gave way, and the ship pulled away from the sinking Marineford. On board, Shanks carefully laid Luffy down, his body still trembling from the strain of his corrupted Gear 5 state. His dark aura had subsided, but the residual effects of the transformation left him pale and weak. Garp, his face etched with worry, knelt beside his grandson. Tears streamed down his face as memories of his grandson flooded his mind, and the pain he felt when he thought he had lost him. Shanks placed a hand on Garp's shoulder and told him that he'd keep Luffy safe, but they needed to find somewhere to regroup. The Red Hair pirates sailed to a secluded island, far from the chaos of Marineford, with a few of Whitebeard's ships behind them. Once ashore, Shanks and his crew worked quickly to tend to Luffy's injuries. Garp stayed by his grandson's side, his gruff demeanor softening as he watched over the unconscious boy. Shanks stood guard at the edge of the camp, his eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of pursuit. He knew the elders wouldn't give up so easily. Shanks turned to the old Vice Admiral and told him to be prepared for the worst, as the elders couldn't be far off. Just as he said this, Marco landed next to them and told them that Marineford had fallen, with no sign of the elders or Whitebeard. He was clearly struggling to stay calm. He also informed them that the rest of the Whitebeard pirates were on their way, as they too expected the worst. Suddenly, Luffy's eyes fluttered open, his head still throbbing with the remnants of his suppressed memories. His surroundings were unfamiliar, but the warm sunlight streaming through the trees and the sound of waves crashing against the shore provided a sense of comfort. He blinked slowly, trying to clear the fog in his mind, but images of the past began to surface. He realized that every moment spent with the harsh elders was a fraud, something embedded into him to chain him. Each memory felt like a sharp sting, and with it, a growing sense of loss. As Luffy sat up, the two figures sitting nearby caught his attention. Shanks sat on one side, his ever-present calm expression softened with concern. Garp was on the other, his usual stern demeanor giving way to a rare, vulnerable look. Garp hugged Luffy tightly as soon as he woke up, and tears began streaming down his face. Shanks offered a soft smile, holding out a bowl of food. Luffy hugged his grandfather tightly before his hunger overtook him, and he began eating like a madman. Pieces of his childhood with the elders, the training, the forced obedience, mixed with scattered memories of his life before. His carefree days with Ace and Sabo, his dreams of becoming Pirate King, his connection to the people who truly mattered. As the memories flooded back, so did the pain. Ace, the brother he had lost, the brother he had failed to save. The grief overwhelmed him, and his hands trembled as he clutched the food. His chest ached with the weight of the past, his emotions bubbling to the surface. He remembered everything. Tears welled up in his eyes as he spoke, his grief raw and unfiltered. The memories of his life with the elders felt like a dark cloud over him, but beneath that cloud, the brighter memories of his true family, his brothers, and his dreams burned fiercely. Garp and Shanks exchanged a glance, knowing how deeply Luffy had been affected. But before either could speak, a loud explosion shattered the calm of the island, sending a tremor through the ground. The sound of distant gunfire followed, and the unmistakable roar of chaos filled the air. The Red Hair pirates immediately sprang into action. Shanks' crew was well trained and among the best, their weapons at the ready as they formed defensive positions around the camp. The Gods Knights, the elite force loyal to the Elders, had arrived, and the Elders themselves were not far behind. Shanks' eyes narrowed as he scanned the horizon. It looked like one of the Elders was nowhere to be found, but his eyes landed on a familiar figure, Figureland Garling. Garp clenched his fists, his face hardening with determination, and Ben Beckman loaded his gun. But before either could make a move, Luffy stood up, his body trembling with both anger and newfound resolve. The haze of grief still lingered in his chest, but it was quickly overtaken by a burning rage. As the Elders and their knights closed in, Luffy's body began to crackle with power. His emotions surged once again, but this time he controlled them. His eyes blazed with fierce determination as his haki surged, igniting the air around him. Gear 5 began to awaken once more, but this time, the surrounding clouds were not dark and chaotic. Instead, they were white, reflecting the clarity of his resolve. Luffy's body pulsed with power, but this time, the uncontrolled fury of Gear 5 was tempered by his regained sense of self. The drums of liberation echoed loudly, filling the air with a rhythm that shook the very ground beneath his feet. The energy around him was charged, and the air crackled with raw, uncontainable power. Luffy began laughing loudly as his body floated in the air before suddenly coming to a stop. He looked at the Elders and told them he was no longer their puppet. As the Elders approached, their expressions unreadable, they seemed unfazed by Luffy's transformation. Saturn, Marcus Mars, and the others held their ground, ready to subdue the rebellious pawn they had once controlled. The Gods Knights moved to intercept, but Luffy's overwhelming presence sent them recoiling. With a single swipe of his hand, the air itself seemed to bend to his will, creating shockwaves that sent the knights flying. Saturn, disappointed, stood in front of him and told him that he was going down the wrong path. He said they'd have to eliminate him to bring balance back to the world. Luffy's eyes burned with defiance as he launched himself at the Elder and sent him flying. The training they had given him was torturous, but he had become much stronger than they ever intended. Now, that strength would work against them. The Elders, sensing the threat Luffy posed, steeled themselves, but they had underestimated the young man they had once sought to control. As Luffy stepped forward, the very earth seemed to tremble beneath his feet as if it too recognized the change within him. The drums of liberation echoed louder, and his conqueror's haki filled the air. With Shanks, Garp, Marco, and the rest of the red-haired pirates at his back, a war against the Gods, Knights, and Elders began. A war that would shake the very foundation of the world. Each man standing on the isolated island was a force of nature, and as such, each clash rang across the seas. Then, on the horizon, a familiar face appeared. Under a storm of righteous fury, Monkey D. Dragon arrived with Sabo and the rest of the revolutionaries. Dragon floated across the sea as lightning crashed around him. He loudly proclaimed to the Elders to give him back his son. This would be the stage for the final battle against the world government and the deciding factor over which party would rule moving forward. Make sure to subscribe and smash the like button for more One Piece videos.